So hey guys, this is my second video, and I'm wanting to talk about something that's mundane, and yet I feel like this small change in perspective will have an impact on your life if you're willing to explore it. So the title says Dust to Dust, and so what I'm talking about today is dust. Now, dust is something we've all been pretty much used to seeing. It's somewhere in our room or in our house, just where we dwell. And I wanted to uh, dive into this further. So, why do we have dust in the places we live that we stay in? Well, from what I can gather, the simplest explanation is I've ignored that spot where the dust has accumulated for whatever reason. I just haven't paid attention to it. I've deliberately ignored it, or it's not useful right now. And so, what I'm going to talk about going forward is physical dust, which is what everyone knows, and then various other forms of dust using that central principle, not paying attention for whatever the reason. And throughout this whole thing, I also want you to keep in your head this quote I found recently. See how things work in systems. A small change in one area can make a big difference in another. So maybe this small change could do just that for you. So the first place we notice dust is physical dust. And from what I can gather, which is pretty obvious, it's a spot that we haven't touched in a while. Like I can look over at my dresser, and there are certain spots on the dresser that I constantly interact with, and then there's certain spots I don't, and that's where I see a culmination of dust. And so when I see that, I can't help but ask myself, why is there dust there? And I look at it and I realize I haven't touched it in a while. I don't plan on touching it soon. And I go through a litany of questions in my head trying to figure out, does it place within the here and now? And so I think periodically we need to go over some of these spots. Another spot I noticed was on my Xbox. I play Xbox at least a couple times a week, and when I look at it, there's a part of it that's has some dust on it, and then there's parts that aren't. And so when I extract that concept onto other parts of my life, I realize there's certain things we interact with. It's filled with many moving parts, and we might only focus on certain parts and leave the rest ignored. And it's only when something goes wrong with those other parts that we pay attention to them. And so I think a good habit for people to get into is those parts that you don't necessarily interact with, and you don't need to in the moment. Give a brief glance, give it a little extra focus for a minute, and just notice how it's part of the whole, and that maybe you might need to look at it later or not at all, but just make sure it doesn't stay in the background of your mind too long. Also, let's see. That's pretty much when it comes to physical dust. Yeah. And then let's move on to emotional dust, as I call it. Emotional dust is it's not necessarily something you see in the same sense as a physical object. Within yourself, you have many different emotions, of course, and there's certain emotions, though, that you tend to ignore. You suppress, that you feel ashamed for. For some people, that's anger. For some people, that's jealousy, sadness, something of the sort. And so those emotions, metaphorically or whatever, figuratively speaking, collect dust. And so I would ask people to, whatever system they use, whatever training tools they have, look at your emotions. Like, for instance, I use meditation, and it, through the meditation practice I notice certain emotions that I have, for whatever the reason in the past, decided not to confront. And so that's a type of dust, emotional dust. Mental dust is the next one. This is something that people who are watching this video and similar videos won't necessarily have a problem with, because for many people, they stop expanding into areas they either don't know or areas that they do know but they could know more. And so while this maybe doesn't affect you guys, I just want to reiterate that as long as you're deepening your knowledge on what you do know, what you do and what you don't know, you won't let any dust accumulate over this area. And the last, not the last one, second to last one, spiritual dust. Now, spiritual dust, everyone has their spiritual traditions, dogmas, whatever they believe in, and I'm not advocating for one over the other. I just want to bring attention to the fact that those who don't spend as much time thinking or doing in this area I would recommend you don't ignore it for too long. That you have a plan in motion for not letting this area of your life accumulate dust. And the last one is relationship dust. This one is, I think, the one that people can really grab onto immediately as well. There's an expression I heard when I was a kid. It was when guests would come over, you would sweep the dust under the rug, which basically meant you would hide things from others because for whatever reason you don't want them to see your mess. And so in relationships, you could be ignoring the things, not paying attention to things, certain messes that you put under the rug. But eventually, you're going to have to face them. You can either face them on your own terms, either somewhat prepared, or you can face them when you least expect it and when you have to. And so I recommend people look at those areas that they've swept under the rug. And lastly, there was another quote I had heard. It went something like, appreciate the interdependence of things around them. And this is especially true when it comes to dust. There's many things in your life that are accumulating dust, and it's up to you to appreciate those things that even if you don't necessarily use. Like, for instance, on my Xbox, the battery usually has a film of dust on top. But even through, I don't necessarily interact with the battery because I don't have to, I can still appreciate the fact that because of that battery, the rest of the Xbox works, and the Xbox works, I have a good time, and so on. So if you guys, I would recommend appreciate the things in your life more that you're maybe letting accumulate dust. So I hope this concept works for someone out there. It's a little, it might not seem like much at first, but once you start to notice the dust in your life, maybe it'll change things for you, hopefully for the better. So that's it. Thank you.